The arrival. Jonah blinked against the harsh light filtering through his eyelids. He slowly opened his eyes to find himself sprawled on the ground, surrounded by unfamiliar terrain. The air was thick with humidity and an acrid scent that made him gag slightly. He pushed himself up onto his elbows and surveyed his surroundings. Jagged rock formations loomed in the distance, casting long shadows across the ground. "Where are we?" he muttered under his breath, his voice hoarse. The last thing he remembered was being aboard an alien spacecraft, a metallic beast that had whisked him away from Earth without warning. Now, he found himself on what appeared to be an alien planet. Jonah's heart raced as he recalled the faces of his fellow captives. He had seen them just before they were pulled into this nightmare. As he stood up fully, Jonah noticed others beginning to stir around him. A few were groaning as they regained consciousness, others were already scrambling to their feet in confusion. He recognized some of them from his previous life, ordinary people thrust into extraordinary circumstances. "Hey! Everyone!" Jonah shouted, trying to gather their attention. "We need to figure out where we are and how to survive." A woman with wild hair and dirt-smudged cheeks approached him cautiously. "Do you know anything about this place?" she asked. "Not yet," Jonah replied, shaking his head. "But we need to stick together if we want to make it out of here." He turned his gaze back toward the rocky landscape, feeling an unsettling sense of foreboding settle in his stomach. The sky above was an eerie shade of purple, dotted with strange clouds that swirled like smoke. Jonah had read science fiction novels where planets looked like this, vividly colored and teeming with danger, but nothing could prepare him for the reality of being stranded on one. "Let's move toward those rocks," he suggested, pointing toward a cluster that seemed to provide some shelter from the elements. "We can regroup there." As they made their way across the uneven terrain, Jonah kept an eye out for anything useful, a weapon or tool that might aid them in their survival. He spotted a few large stones that could be used as makeshift weapons if necessary. Once they reached the rocky outcrop, Jonah took stock of his companions. There were about 10 of them in total, men and women from different walks of life. He recognized some faces but couldn't recall names just yet. "Okay," he began, adopting a more authoritative tone as he addressed the group. "We need to establish some rules if we're going to survive this." A tall man with broad shoulders stepped forward. "And what makes you think you should lead us?" he challenged. Jonah met his gaze steadily. "I don't want to lead anyone, I just want us all to make it through this alive. We need a plan." The man frowned but nodded slightly in acknowledgement. "First things first," Jonah continued, "we need food and water. We can't survive long without those essentials." A woman with glasses raised her hand hesitantly. "I'm not sure how we'll find water here," she said nervously. Jonah thought for a moment before responding. "Let's look for any signs of streams or pools nearby. If we can find vegetation, there's a chance there's water close by." With newfound determination, Jonah divided the group into smaller teams. Some would search for food while others would scout for water sources. He felt a flicker of hope. They might have been abducted by aliens and dropped on this death world, but they were still alive, and that meant there was still a chance for survival. As they spread out across the rocky landscape, Jonah took note of everything around him, the strange flora that clung stubbornly to life in this harsh environment and the distant sounds of wildlife echoing through the air. Hours passed as they searched for resources under the relentless sun. Jonah's team stumbled upon a narrow ravine lined with thick bushes that bore strange fruit, bright red and glistening in the light. "Look at these," one of his companions exclaimed excitedly. Jonah approached cautiously. He had no idea whether these fruits were safe to eat or if they would poison them instead. He picked one up carefully and examined it closely before taking a small bite from its side. The flavor burst in his mouth, sweet yet tangy, and he felt relief wash over him as nothing adverse happened immediately. "They're edible," Jonah declared after swallowing cautiously. The others cheered as they gathered around him and began picking fruit from the bushes eagerly. After filling their packs with as much fruit as they could carry, Jonah led them back toward their makeshift camp near the rocks where they had first awakened. As evening approached, shadows lengthened across the ground, creating an eerie atmosphere that made Jonah uneasy. Once everyone settled down around a small fire they managed to start using dry twigs and branches gathered earlier. Jonah took stock of their situation again. "We found food," he said slowly while looking at each person around him intently. "But we still need water." A woman named Clara spoke up then. Her voice trembled slightly as she shared her thoughts about exploring deeper into the ravine where they'd found fruit earlier. Perhaps there was water nearby too. Jonah nodded thoughtfully. It was worth investigating further tomorrow morning when they could see better in daylight. As night fell over Varenthia like a heavy blanket draped across their campfire flickering weakly against encroaching darkness, Jonah couldn't shake off feelings of dread creeping into his mind. What other dangers lurked beyond this temporary sanctuary? He glanced at his companions who were busy sharing stories about their past lives before being taken by aliens, each tale revealing glimpses into who they once were before everything changed forever. Suddenly feeling exhausted from everything that had transpired since arriving here only hours ago, and knowing more challenges lay ahead, Jonah closed his eyes briefly while listening intently until sleep finally claimed him amidst whispers echoing through shadows surrounding them all. The first night. Lila sat on a flat rock, her heart pounding in her chest as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the alien landscape. The cave they had chosen as their temporary shelter felt both safe and claustrophobic, its walls lined with strange, luminescent fungi that pulsed softly in the dim light. She could hear the distant sounds of creatures moving outside, their calls echoing through the stillness of night. "Is everyone okay?" she asked, glancing around at her fellow survivors. They were gathered in a circle, their faces illuminated by the flickering fire they had managed to start. Jonah, the engineer who had taken charge earlier, nodded. "We're all exhausted, but we made it through the day. Tomorrow, we'll need to focus on finding water." Lila took a deep breath and tried to calm her racing thoughts. She had always been fascinated by botany and had studied various plant species on Earth, but nothing could have prepared her for the alien flora of Varenthia. The plants outside were unlike anything she had ever seen. Some glowed with an ethereal light, while others seemed to shift and change shape in response to their surroundings. As she contemplated their situation, Lila's mind wandered back to her life on Earth, a life filled with lectures, research papers, and endless hours spent in greenhouses. Now she was trapped on a Deathworld with a group of strangers, fighting for survival. "Lila?" Jonah's voice pulled her from her thoughts. "Do you think you can identify any of the plants outside? We might need them for food or medicine." She nodded slowly. "I can try. But I'll need to be careful, some of these plants could be toxic." Jonah's brow furrowed with concern. "Let's not take any unnecessary risks. We'll stick together when we go out tomorrow." As night enveloped Varenthia, Lila felt a sense of unease settle over her. The sounds of wildlife grew louder, strange rustling noises and guttural growls that sent shivers down her spine. She glanced at the others, they were huddled close together, whispering among themselves. "Do you think we'll be okay?" Clara asked softly, her eyes wide with fear. Lila forced a smile to reassure her. "We'll figure it out together," she said firmly. "We just need to stay alert." After a few hours of restless chatter and anxious glances toward the entrance of the cave, Lila decided to step outside for some fresh air. The cool night air felt refreshing against her skin as she took a cautious step into the darkness. The landscape was transformed under the glow of multiple moons hanging low in the sky, each casting a different hue across the ground. Lila marveled at the sight, it was beautiful yet haunting. Suddenly, a rustle from nearby bushes caught her attention. She froze, heart racing as she strained to see what lurked in the shadows. A pair of glowing eyes stared back at her from within the foliage, a creature unlike anything she had encountered before. "Lila!" Jonah's voice called from behind her, breaking through her momentary paralysis. She turned quickly to face him, trying to keep her voice steady as she pointed toward the creature. "There's something out there." Jonah stepped closer cautiously and peered into the darkness where Lila had been looking. "What is it?" Before she could answer, the creature emerged, a small quadrupedal beast covered in iridescent scales that shimmered in shades of blue and green. It looked at them curiously before darting away into the underbrush. "Was that friendly?" Lila asked, still feeling shaken. "I don't know," Jonah replied thoughtfully. "But it's probably best not to assume anything out here." They returned to the cave where most of their companions were now asleep or trying to rest uneasily on rocky surfaces. "Let's keep watch," Lila suggested quietly as they settled down near the fire again. Jonah nodded in agreement. He seemed more resolute now that they had witnessed something alive outside their temporary refuge. As they took turns keeping watch through the night, Lila couldn't shake off feelings of dread creeping into her mind. What other dangers lurked beyond this makeshift sanctuary? She thought about how little they knew about this planet and its inhabitants. Hours passed slowly. Lila found herself lost in thought while staring into the flickering flames when suddenly she heard a commotion coming from deeper within the cave, a series of panicked whispers followed by an urgent voice. "Everyone! Wake up!" Clara shouted as she rushed toward them with wide eyes filled with terror. "What happened?" Jonah asked immediately as he sat up straight. "I saw something," Clara exclaimed breathlessly. "It was huge. It was moving around outside." Lila felt a chill run down her spine at Clara's words. Fear gripped her heart as she exchanged worried glances with Jonah and others who were now fully awake and alert. "Did you get a good look at it?" Jonah pressed. Clara shook her head vigorously. "No. It was too dark, but I swear it was massive. We need to do something." Jonah took a deep breath and tried to remain calm despite rising panic within him. "All right," he said decisively. "We need to fortify our position here until morning when we can assess things better." Lila felt adrenaline coursing through her veins as they all sprang into action, gathering rocks and branches to create makeshift barricades around their camp entrance while keeping their voices low so as not to attract any attention from whatever lurked outside. As they worked together under dim moonlight filtering through gaps in rocky formations above them, Lila couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of unity forming among them, a bond forged by shared fear and uncertainty that somehow made this terrifying experience slightly more bearable. Once they finished reinforcing their defenses for now, everyone settled back down around the fire again, eyes darting nervously toward shadows beyond their makeshift walls while trying desperately not to think about what might be lurking just beyond reach. The night dragged on slowly. Every crackle of twigs or rustle of leaves sent shivers through Lila's body as she kept watch alongside Jonah, both silently promising each other they would protect one another no matter what happened next. Eventually dawn began breaking over Varenthia, the first rays of sunlight illuminating everything around them like a fresh canvas waiting for new stories yet untold, and with it came hope that perhaps today would bring answers instead of more questions about this mysterious world they found themselves trapped within. The betrayal. Fiona leaned against the cave wall, her arms crossed tightly as she surveyed the group gathered around the fire. The camaraderie that had formed over the past few days felt fragile, like a delicate web that could easily be torn apart. She had been observing them closely, taking note of their strengths and weaknesses, and now she was ready to make her move. "Hey, everyone," she called out, her voice bright and cheerful. "I have an idea that could help us escape this place." Jonah looked up from where he was sharpening a makeshift spear. "What do you mean?" he asked, curiosity piqued. Fiona stepped closer to the fire, her eyes glinting with excitement. "I've been thinking about how we can get off this planet. There must be a way to signal for help or find a ship. We just need to work together." Lila, who had been examining some plants nearby, frowned. "We've barely explored this area. We don't know what's out there or if there are any ships nearby." That's exactly why we need to take action. Fiona insisted, her voice rising slightly. Sitting here and waiting for something to happen isn't going to get us anywhere. We need to be proactive. Marcus, who had been listening quietly, finally spoke up. I appreciate your enthusiasm, Fiona, but we need to be cautious. We don't know what dangers lurk beyond this cave. Fiona waved her hand dismissively. That's just fear talking. We can't let fear control us. If we want to survive, we have to take risks. Jonah exchanged glances with Marcus and Lila, sensing the tension in the air. He wanted to believe in Fiona's plan but couldn't shake the feeling that it was too soon to act. Maybe we should gather more information first, Jonah suggested cautiously. Explore a little further before making any decisions. Fiona's expression hardened at his words. You're all just scared. I'm telling you, if we don't do something soon, we'll be stuck here forever. As the argument continued to escalate, Lila felt a knot tightening in her stomach. She had always been the peacemaker among her friends back on Earth, and she hated seeing this group fracture under pressure. Let's take a break and think things through, Lila proposed gently. We can all share our ideas without shouting at each other. Fiona scoffed but reluctantly stepped back from the fire, crossing her arms again as she glared at Jonah and Marcus. The atmosphere grew tense as everyone sat in silence for a moment, each lost in their thoughts. Lila could sense the growing divide between Fiona and the rest of the group. It was as if a chasm was forming that could lead to betrayal if they weren't careful. After a while, Jonah broke the silence again. Why don't we split into two groups? One can scout further into the jungle while the other stays here to fortify our defenses. Fiona perked up at this suggestion. I'll lead one of the groups. We can cover more ground that way. I think it's better if Marcus leads, Lila interjected quickly. He has more experience with survival tactics. Fiona shot her an incredulous look but nodded slowly as if conceding defeat for now. Fine. But I'll take charge of gathering supplies here then. With that decision made, they began preparing for their respective tasks, Marcus organizing his team while Jonah gathered materials for fortification. As they set out into the jungle once more, Lila couldn't shake off feelings of unease lingering in her mind. Something about Fiona's eagerness felt off, like she was hiding something beneath her cheerful facade. The jungle was alive with sounds as they moved deeper into its embrace, birds screeching overhead and rustling leaves indicating movement nearby, but Lila kept her focus on gathering plants and observing their surroundings. After some time exploring together with Marcus leading their small group through dense underbrush, Lila spotted a cluster of vibrant flowers blooming near a stream. Look at these, she exclaimed excitedly as she knelt down to examine them closely. Marcus joined her side curiously as he observed the flowers' intricate patterns and colors shimmering in sunlight filtering through trees above. They're beautiful, he remarked thoughtfully before turning serious again. But remember, we need food and water too. Lila nodded in agreement but couldn't help feeling drawn toward those flowers. They seemed so vibrant compared to everything else around them. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the jungle followed by frantic rustling sounds nearby. Both Marcus and Lila froze instinctively as adrenaline surged through their veins. What was that? Lila whispered urgently. Marcus motioned for silence as he scanned their surroundings cautiously, then they heard it again, a low growl reverberating through the air sending chills down Lila's spine. Back away slowly, Marcus instructed firmly before taking a step back himself. They needed distance from whatever creature lurked nearby. Just then, a massive creature burst forth from behind thick foliage, a hulking beast covered in dark scales with sharp claws glinting menacingly in sunlight. Lila gasped as she stumbled backward instinctively while Marcus quickly grabbed her arm pulling her away from danger. Run, he shouted urgently as they turned to flee deeper into the jungle. Adrenaline coursing through their veins propelled them forward despite fear gripping their hearts tightly. They dashed through tangled vines and underbrush, the creature hot on their heels growling ferociously behind them, but just when it seemed like they would be caught. A loud roar erupted from somewhere else nearby, causing both Marcus and Lila to freeze momentarily before realizing it wasn't directed toward them but rather toward their pursuer. "What is happening?" Lila panted breathlessly as they watched another creature, a larger one, emerge from deeper within the jungle, charging toward their attacker. The two beasts collided violently, teeth snapping and claws slashing as they fought fiercely, providing Marcus and Lila with an unexpected opportunity for escape. "Now's our chance!" Marcus shouted urgently as he pulled Lila along with him deeper into safety, away from danger unfolding behind them. They ran until they reached a small clearing where they finally stopped, breathless and wide-eyed from adrenaline still coursing through them both. "That was insane!" Lila exclaimed incredulously while trying to catch her breath again, heart still racing wildly within her chest. Marcus nodded gravely, still scanning surroundings cautiously before finally relaxing slightly once he deemed it safe enough for now. "We need to regroup with everyone else," he said firmly after taking a moment longer to collect himself fully again before starting back toward where they'd left camp earlier. As they made their way back through familiar paths leading toward their temporary home, a nagging feeling lingered within Lila's mind about Fiona's earlier behavior. Something told her that not all was well among their group despite surviving yet another harrowing encounter together. When they finally returned back at camp, everyone else appeared anxious, awaiting news from both teams sent out earlier. Jonah rushed forward immediately upon seeing them approach, visibly relieved at sight of his friends returning safely once more. "Thank goodness you're all right," he exclaimed breathlessly before glancing around nervously, looking for signs of trouble elsewhere too, perhaps sensing tension lingering between members still unsettled after recent events unfolding around them all too quickly lately. But before anyone could speak further, Fiona stepped forward, suddenly breaking through crowd surrounding Jonah, looking determined yet calculating somehow beneath surface facade presented outwardly once more. "I have some news," she announced confidently, drawing everyone's attention toward herself immediately, eyes narrowing suspiciously at what might come next. "The final stand." As Fiona stepped forward, her expression was a mix of determination and something darker that Lila couldn't quite place. The tension in the air was palpable, and Jonah exchanged worried glances with Marcus. They all sensed that whatever Fiona had to say could change everything. "I have a plan," Fiona announced, her voice steady. "We need to take the initiative. We can't just sit here waiting for help to arrive or for the aliens to make their next move. We need to find a way to communicate with them and negotiate our release." Jonah frowned, his instincts telling him that this might be a dangerous path. "And how do you propose we do that? We have no idea what they want or how they think." Fiona waved her hand dismissively. "That's exactly why we need to take action. We can't let fear dictate our decisions. If we show them we're not just helpless victims, they might reconsider their approach." Lila felt a knot tighten in her stomach as she listened to Fiona's words. There was something about her enthusiasm that felt off, as if she were trying to manipulate the group into following her agenda. "But what if they don't respond well?" Lila interjected cautiously. "What if they see us as a threat?" Fiona's eyes narrowed slightly, but she maintained her composure. "Then we'll deal with it when it comes to that. But sitting here and doing nothing is not an option." Marcus stepped forward, his expression serious. "Fiona, we need to think this through carefully. We've already faced so many dangers out there, we can't afford to make reckless decisions." The tension in the cave escalated as voices rose in disagreement. Lila felt torn between wanting to support her friends and recognizing the potential danger of Fiona's proposal. "Enough!" Jonah finally shouted, cutting through the chaos. "We need a plan that everyone agrees on. If we're going to do this, we need to work together." Fiona's expression shifted slightly as she realized she wasn't gaining the support she had hoped for. "Fine," she said reluctantly. "Let's come up with a plan together then." As they sat down in a circle, brainstorming ideas, Lila couldn't shake off the feeling that Fiona was still harboring ulterior motives. She watched as Fiona subtly maneuvered the conversation, trying to steer it toward her vision of confronting the aliens. After several hours of discussion, they finally settled on a plan. They would create a signal using their limited resources, something that would indicate their desire for communication rather than confrontation. As night fell once again over Varenthia, Lila felt a sense of unease creeping back into her mind. The jungle outside was alive with sounds, creatures calling out in the darkness, but it was the silence within their group that worried her most. The next day, they set out into the jungle once more, armed with makeshift tools and materials they had gathered over the past few days. Lila worked alongside Jonah and Marcus to construct a large signal using reflective materials and bright colors from the plants they had discovered. Fiona hovered nearby, offering suggestions but seeming increasingly impatient as time passed without any sign of success. "Are you sure this will work?" she asked skeptically as they finished setting up their signal. Jonah nodded confidently. "It should attract attention if anyone is watching from above." But as they waited for hours under the blazing sun, Lila couldn't shake off her growing anxiety. Something didn't feel right. She could sense tension building within Fiona as well, a restless energy that hinted at something darker brewing beneath the surface. Just when Lila thought they would have to abandon their efforts, a low rumble echoed through the jungle. The ground trembled slightly beneath their feet. "What was that?" Clara exclaimed, looking around nervously. Marcus narrowed his eyes as he scanned the treetops above them. It sounded like something large moving through the forest. Before anyone could react further, a massive creature burst through the underbrush, a hulking beast with scales glistening in shades of green and brown. It roared ferociously as it charged toward them. "Run!" Jonah shouted as everyone scrambled for cover. Lila's heart raced as she darted behind a tree trunk, adrenaline surging through her veins. She could hear Marcus shouting orders while trying to rally everyone together. "Stay close. We need to regroup," Marcus yelled over the chaos. Lila glanced back at Fiona, who stood frozen in place, her expression one of shock mixed with something else entirely. Was it fear or excitement? She couldn't tell. As the creature lunged toward them again, Marcus managed to grab hold of Lila's arm and pull her away just in time. They ducked behind another tree as branches snapped underfoot from its rampage. "Where's everyone else?" Lila gasped breathlessly as she looked around frantically for their companions amidst chaos unfolding all around them. "I don't know. We need to find them," Marcus replied urgently before peeking around their hiding spot cautiously. He could see Clara and Theo trying desperately to fend off another attacking creature nearby. "Keep moving," he shouted at them while waving his arms frantically trying to direct attention elsewhere away from where Lila stood still momentarily paralyzed by fear gripping tightly at her heart now too. Just then, a loud crack echoed through air followed by another roar, this time sounding different somehow, as if two beasts were now engaged in battle against each other. Lila turned instinctively toward where noise originated from. What she saw sent chills down her spine. A larger creature had appeared seemingly out of nowhere charging headlong into battle against their pursuer. The two beasts collided violently, their roars mingling together into an unsettling symphony of chaos, but amidst all this turmoil something caught Lila's eye. Fiona had slipped away unnoticed during all this madness. Where did she go? Lila whispered urgently while trying not to lose focus on what was happening around them now, panic rising within her chest again knowing full well how dangerous things could become without proper leadership present among them all. Marcus glanced back toward where Fiona had been standing moments ago before shaking his head grimly realizing she'd vanished completely from sight now too far gone into shadows beyond reach perhaps even lost forever. "We have to keep moving," he urged again pulling Lila along behind him deeper into safety away from danger unfolding behind them both still uncertain about what lay ahead next. As they navigated through thick underbrush dodging branches snapping overhead while keeping an eye out for any signs of danger lurking nearby, they finally reached a small clearing where sunlight poured down freely illuminating everything around them like hope shining brightly amidst darkness threatening encroachment upon their lives. But just when relief began washing over them, a low growl echoed through air again, sending shivers racing down Lila's spine once more, instinctively turning toward source of sound only to find themselves surrounded by more creatures emerging from shadows readying themselves for attack. "We're not safe yet," Marcus shouted, urgently gripping tightly onto Lila's arm while scanning surroundings, frantically searching for escape route leading away from impending doom closing in fast upon them both, now too late perhaps even. In that moment, Lila realized something crucial: they needed each other more than ever if they wanted any chance at survival against overwhelming odds stacked against them all now. With renewed determination coursing through her veins, she turned back toward Marcus, meeting his gaze resolutely, knowing deep down inside that whatever happened next, they would face it together no matter what challenges lay ahead.